Police say they've got hold of a large part of the terror network surrounding the Manchester bomber. As more premises are raided, officers say there have been significant arrests and fines.
We've got to understand everything around the dead terrorist, the network, and how they manufactured the explosive device. Enormous progress being made, but we still have some loose ends to work on.
And after a review of security at more than 1,000 events across the country this bank holiday weekend, people are being urged to go out and enjoy themselves. Also tonight, Jeremy Corbyn says UK foreign policy would change under Labour to one that reduces the threat to the country.
We must be brave enough to admit that the war on terror is not working. We need a smarter way to reduce the threat from countries that nurture terrorists and generate terrorism.
Just when you think everything's over.
Meanwhile, Manchester defiantly gears up for a weekend of music and sport. And managing expectations. Will it be a win for Conte's Chelsea or Wenger's Arsenal in this weekend's FA Cup final?
Coming up on Sports Day, I'm in Manchester at the City Games as sport plays its part in bringing the city together at the end of a tragic week.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Britain's top counter-terrorism officer says they've captured a large part of the terror network involved in the Manchester Arena attack, where 22 people died. Mark Rowley said immense progress had been made in the investigation, but there were still important lines to pursue and arrests to be made. It comes ahead of a bank holiday weekend where more than 1,000 public events are taking place. The terror threat remains at a critical level, which means another attack may take place imminently. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Samford reports.
An already vast investigation still expanding. Each day, counter-terrorism detectives raid more properties in Manchester, cutting through the shutters at this Moss Side barber shop. The shop was run by Abs Forjani, a cousin of the Manchester bomber. Forjani was arrested earlier in the week with at least one of his brothers. Police also raided another house in the middle of the night, bringing the number of people in custody to 8, all men, mostly Libyan, and aged between 18 and 38.
They're very significant, these arrests. We're very happy we've got our hands around some of the key players that we're concerned about. Let's say there's still a little bit more to do.
The bomber, Salman Abedi, came back to Manchester from Libya last week. Renting a flat in this block, he'd already bought many of the ingredients for his lethal device. It was here that Salman Abedi spent his last weekend, putting his bomb together, making the final preparations to attack a concert full of teenage girls. Detectives say they've made very significant finds and, crucially, believe they have captured a large part of his terrorist network.
We have hundreds of officers that are working on this investigation from across the National Counter-Terrorism Policing Network, and we have seized thousands of exhibits which are now being assessed. I think it's fair to say that there's been enormous progress with the investigation, but still an awful lot of work to do.
I understand the finds include bomb-making chemicals, but because of concerns about what might still be out there, the threat level will remain at critical. The Home Secretary saying people can expect much higher security at the 1,300 events across the country this bank holiday weekend.
I hope that they will take comfort from that, be able to feel more secure, because we mustn't let this terrible terrorist incident impact on our lives. Let's carry on this weekend, this bank holiday weekend, with our families and friends.
Already, people getting away for the weekend can expect to find armed officers patrolling trains out London for the first time. As the investigation into Salman Abedi's atrocity continues, we're learning more about his father, who was detained in Libya this weekend. He's believed to have had strong connections to this man, Abu Qatada, who was suspected of being a senior al-Qaeda figure in London. This businessman says that the bomber's father was always seeing Abu Qatada in the capital. He was one of Abu Qatada's supporters, Adel Al-Raini told the BBC. Whenever he went to London, they used to meet up. Detectives don't pretend to have the full picture yet. They are growing in confidence, but for now, going into one of the most important weekends of the summer, everyone is nervous.
And we can speak to Daniel now. Daniel, how can police be so confident that they've got most of this network?
Well, Rita, we've watched this week as detectives have bit by bit put this case together. First they arrested the bomber's brother, then his cousins, and then a wider network of acquaintances. Ultimately, of course, some of them may be released without charge, but we've also watched as search teams have blasted their way into property after property, and what they found there, bomb-making materials and ingredients, has slowly given them confidence that they've got a good picture of what exactly did happen, and that's been very important for them in growing in confidence as the week has gone on, and that's why they finally, I think, feel that they do have this network under control. That's why I think that although the threat level remains at critical, it's more because they're nervous about bringing it down too quickly than that they really feel there's a real threat as we go into this bank holiday weekend.
Daniel, thank you. Daniel Samford there. Jeremy Corbyn has placed tackling terror at the centre of an election campaign speech, his first since Monday's bomb attack. He declared that the war on terror is not working, and he pledged to change British foreign policy if Labour were to win the election to reduce the threat to the country. Political opponents have criticised the timing of his speech as well as his message. Our political correspondent Vicky Young's report contains flash photography from the start.
Jeremy Corbyn knows this is a sensitive time. After a terrorist atrocity, the Labour leader restarted his election campaign today, joining a silent tribute to Manchester's victims. But the Labour leader didn't backtrack from long-held views on foreign policy, making his case that it's time to do things differently.
Many experts, including professionals in our intelligence and security services, have pointed out the connections between wars that we've been involved in or supported and fought in other countries, such as Libya, and terrorism here at home. That assessment in no way reduces the guilt of those who attack our children.
Stressing his patriotism, Mr Corbyn repeatedly emphasised that nothing excused Monday's massacre, and he had this direct message for Britain's soldiers.
I want to assure you that under my leadership you will only be deployed abroad when there is a clear need, and only when there is a plan that you have the resources to do your job and secure an outcome that delivers lasting peace.
Mr Corbyn promised that a Labour government would give the security services the money they required, and cuts to police budgets would be reversed.
The issue of security could dominate the rest of this election campaign, and today Jeremy Corbyn has repeated views he's held for decades, that military action abroad has made the UK less safe. But to others, that sounds like an excuse for terrorism.
Senior Conservatives have been quick to hit out at the Labour leader, calling his speech monstrous.
This has been caused not by us, as Jeremy Corbyn would have us believe. It's been caused by a sick ideology, a perverted version of Islam that hates us and hates our way of life. And to say anything now to legitimate or justify those who have carried out the atrocity in Manchester is, in my view, absolutely obscene.
Thank you. Cheers.
The arguments have returned, and so have election photo opportunities. The SNP leader condemned the Manchester attack, but said politicians shouldn't shy away from debate.
Bombing campaigns, whether in Syria or Libya, without a coherent strategy to tackle the underlying problems there, often hinder rather than help those situations. So I think these are the things that we need to debate, and debate vigorously.
This evening Mr Corbyn faced more questions, this time on defence. Did he agree with Labour Party policy to renew Trident?
I voted against the renewal of it. Everybody knows that.
But can you tell the British people tonight that you support the renewal of Trident?
We're going ahead with the programme which has been agreed by Parliament and voted on by the Labour Party.
Do you support it?
Listen, my views on nuclear weapons are well known. I want to achieve a nuclear-free world through multilateral disarmament, through the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
How a country protects its citizens is now likely to be high on the agenda for the rest of this election campaign. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
And you can watch the full interview by Andrew Neil with Jeremy Corbyn at 7 o'clock tonight on BBC One. Meanwhile, Theresa May has told world leaders at the G7 summit in Sicily that more needs to be done to tackle foreign fighters seeking to return from conflicts in the Middle East. The Prime Minister also called for concerted pressure on technology companies to remove extremist material from the internet. From Sicily, our Deputy Political Editor John Pinar reports.
Stagey affairs, these summits, beautiful settings, big stars, some loving the spotlight, Britain's leader keen to use it. Sometimes it's hard to move, let alone grab attention here or with those watching at home. You can just see Theresa May there behind Donald Trump. But after the outrage in Manchester, she was keen to lead the line against terrorism. Mrs May urged leaders to do more against online extremism, to get web companies to identify and block harmful content, to alert authorities. She wanted action against terrorists stepped up.
The threat of terror is one that all our countries face. And now more than ever, we must strengthen our resolve to overcome this threat together and stand firm against those who want to destroy our precious values and our way of life.
No one imagines there are easy answers to terrorism here at this summit or anywhere else. As party campaigning resumes, the differences are profound. Mrs May won't want to be accused of exploiting this summit for political gain. She will want British voters to judge she's the one best qualified to lead her party and the country. Earlier, the Prime Minister met France's new president. Her message here was her message all day.
The incident shows it's so important for us to work together in defeating terrorism.
We know this is kind of attack. We know how it can hurt.
At the summit working session, agreement to cooperate against extremists was easy to find. Even leaders who don't always get on managed it here. Mrs May suggested more help for countries in conflict zones detaining foreign fighters. The summit statement, pledging countries to do more and to do more together, was duly signed and sealed. Sticking together on an issue like terrorism is a must for leaders at a big summit. And it's not just for show. But dealing with a problem like this takes complex solutions, time and patience to tackle a threat that will continue long, long after big set occasions like this one have come and gone. John Pinar, BBC News at the G7 in Sicily.
Well, here the police and security services say they're keeping an eye on 3,000 people of interest and that they have 500 active investigations to deal with. This week's atrocity has again raised questions about government strategy and whether it has the right powers to deal with those who pose a possible risk. Our Home Editor Mark Easton reports.
The murder of Lee Rigby in Woolwich 2013 prompted David Cameron to reshape his counter-terrorism strategy.
Absolutely resolute in its stand against violent extremism.
The focus was on homegrown extremism, with public sector workers becoming legally obliged to inform police if they thought someone was displaying extremist behaviour. The government set up an extremism task force and proposed a counter-extremism bill with tough powers against anyone deemed to be an extremist. But the legislation now looks unlikely ever to happen because ministers struggle to define extremism, and concerns the approach fosters suspicion and distrust in largely law-abiding Muslim communities. The terror attacks in Paris in 2015 sent a shockwave across Europe. In the UK, ministers responded by announcing an extra 1,900 spies and 1,000 more police firearms officers.
We have been building the capability of police here in the UK to respond to...
But the number of firearms officers is actually 1,300 lower than in 2010. The attack in Westminster last March once again focused concerns on keeping track of individuals known to have radical views. There were questions as to why people like the murderer Khalid Masood couldn't be monitored and, if necessary, detained. Security services have 3,000 people under investigation in active operations, but only 7 people have their movements restricted under special powers. The courts take a dim view of limiting people's freedom if they haven't been convicted of a crime. The dreadful bombing in Manchester was followed by claims that cuts to policing may have contributed to the attack, an accusation emphatically denied by the government. Ring-fenced money for the police's counter-terrorism effort has increased over the last few years, from £594 million in 2015-16 to £675 million now. But that doesn't tell the whole story, because that money comes out of the total police budget. Central government money for police has actually fallen 25% since 2010. In Greater Manchester, police counter-terrorism funding is up £6 million, but the force says its overall budget must go down £14 million. Spotting, monitoring and neutralising the threat from homegrown terrorists is partly about resources, of course. But it's also about creating a society where such an ideology cannot breed and thrive. Mark Easton, BBC News.
All of those who died in Monday's attack have now been named. The 22nd victim was 15-year-old Megan Hurley. She was from Halewood in Merseyside. Danny Savage reports from Manchester now on a community grieving for lost family and friends.
In central Manchester today, people queued to buy flowers in remembrance of strangers. Many are at a loss about what's happened, but have to do something.
It was inconceivable to try and understand how the families are feeling, especially the children. It's just shocking.
I've been a Coronation Street superfan my entire life.
29-year-old Martin Hett was one of those murdered on Monday night. The outgoing Coronation Street superfan was well known online.
As these possibilities got less and less and less, you still had some hope that there would be something. And when you actually got the call that actually confirmed that he'd died in this terrible explosion, it's indescribable. It's just, your world just collapses. Terrible.
The final and 22nd victim to be named today was 15-year-old Megan Hurley. Her brother was seriously injured too. A note on the family business only hints at the true enormity of the tragedy. A picture of the horror which faced the first responders has emerged too. On the right here is paramedic Adam Williams. He is worried about the long-term effect on him and his colleagues.
That is a big concern for all of us. Possibly myself, there will be some permanent scars there, emotionally. And I do worry that my colleagues will suffer the same.
There is a very sombre and respectful atmosphere here. It may be 4 days since the atrocity, but that really is just a blink of an eye. And people here are still just trying to come to terms with what happened and coming to pay their respects.
22 lives lost, countless others changed forever. Families left with just memories of those who will never come home. Danny Savage, BBC News, Manchester.
Well, despite the traumatic events of earlier in the week, Manchester has today been attempting to prepare for a bank holiday weekend of sport and music. This evening, the city centre is being transformed for the Great City Games, which is a free athletics event. There will be an increased security presence, of course, but Manchester is determined to carry on. Well, our correspondent Judith Moritz is there for us now. Judith.
Yes, and in the shadow of the town hall, the men's long jump is underway here. A few minutes ago, we saw a double Olympic medalist, Greg Rutherford, taking part to a great reception. There is a wonderful atmosphere here and a good crowd. The organisers have told me that they know the tone of this year's Games will feel different. They say that their thoughts and the thoughts of everyone here are with those affected by the arena attack, and that this is a vital part of showing Manchester getting back on its feet.
It's not just the athletes who are racing in Manchester. After the attack, preparations were put on hold. But since the Games got the green light, they've been working flat out to get ready. There's extra security and more police for events tonight and the Great Manchester Run at the weekend.
Of course, there are some people that are nervous, some people who are seeking reassurance. So not every single person will turn up and take part on Sunday, but the overwhelming feeling has been, yes, we're delighted that it's going ahead. We want to be involved. We want to demonstrate our solidarity, our support and our passion for the city.
Lee Webber is one of 30,000 runners registered for the race. She says she's apprehensive but determined to take part.
It's not as if it's in a place where everybody can be checked, so I know that is a high risk in that way. But I think, to be honest, all we can do is just obviously hope that nothing is going to happen. That's all we can do.
This bank holiday weekend, there are big events happening across the country, from Liverpool's Sound City Festival to Radio 1's big weekend in Hull. Security has been stepped up across the board, but even so, there are some people with tickets who sold or returned them, feeling too uncomfortable to go.
Just when you think everything's over.
This afternoon, Manchester legends the Charlatans played an intimate gig. Tomorrow night they'll be playing at Old Trafford Cricket Ground. 50,000 people bought tickets. The band know that some of those are now too worried to turn up.
I feel that too, and I think it's okay to be nervous, but I think that the music will, it'll help, and it's important to get back on your feet after something so treacherous.
Many of the band's fans say they are undaunted, like Mary and Dave, who've travelled from Nottingham to Manchester to see them play.
Charlatans mad. My family were a bit worried, I must admit, but no, I wasn't at all worried.
The biggest fear to me was, would it be cancelled? But obviously it hasn't, so we're still here.
From freshly inked tattoos to newly painted walls, the city symbol, the worker bee, is everywhere. You can see that many here are defiant, but no one is complacent. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Manchester.
Neither the Conservatives nor Labour are being honest over their tax and spending plans. That's according to economists from an influential think tank. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has criticised both parties' policy proposals, saying they fail to address the long-term challenges facing the country. Well, our economics editor Kamal Ahmed is here. So, Kamal, why are they being so critical?
Well, I think, Rita, there are two big reasons. Firstly, do the numbers add up? And secondly, have they been honest about the big challenges, for example, the rising cost of social care? And on both, the IFS is frankly not convinced. Let's think about the Conservatives first. Can they really drive through those spending cuts they say they still want to do, those cuts in work benefits? The IFS says that their proposals on the NHS budget, for example, are challenging. Can it really be delivered? And then for Labour, the issue is that big idea, the tax rises it wants to drive through. £49 billion of tax rises. The IFS suggests that they'll only get £40 billion, a £9 billion shortfall, and actually the impact won't just be on the rich, but it will actually be on lots more people than Labour suggests. Now, manifestos are important because in this election they have laid out two very different views of the economy, so they're worth reading and looking at. But I think voters need to be aware that some of those detailed promises in the manifestos won't always come true.
Kamal, thank you. 26 people, among them children, have been killed in Egypt after gunmen attacked buses taking a group of Coptic Christians to a monastery. Witnesses said masked men stopped the vehicles before opening fire. Coptic Christians have been targeted by militants several times in recent months. At least 46 were killed in 2 churches in the country in April. A man with autism who put a homemade bomb on a London Underground train has been jailed for 15 years. The judge said the reasons for 20-year-old Damon Smith's actions weren't clear, but that he wasn't motivated by terrorism.